Well, I'm Mary Gentile, and I'm the creator and director of Giving Voice to Values, or GVV, as I refer to it, which is an innovative approach to values-driven leadership development. It all started for me. My first position in business education was at Harvard Business School. I was there from 1985 to 1995. And although I started as a case writer, I quickly took over managing and directing their entire case writing program for the business school, which was a really nice experience for me in terms of becoming better able to understand the pedagogy of case method teaching and case method writing, and also to become familiar with all the different disciplines, because I was working with people who were writing cases in finance, operations, marketing, OB, etc. And I did that for a few years. When I started, I was managing a group of about 30 case writers, and by the end, it was over 60. And I also wrote a number of cases myself, several of which went platinum. And so I very much enjoyed that experience, but it wasn't ultimately satisfying for me. And I remember going to my manager at the time and saying, well, I'm going to leave. And she said, why? And I said, well, I want to do something that feels like it matters more. and she said, oh, is that is important to you? So she said, well, it just so happened that they had recently gotten some funding to develop a new course around ethics and values in business. And did I want to work on that? And I said, well, yeah, that sounded interesting. So I started out helping them to develop their first required curriculum around business ethics and leadership. I started doing consulting to business schools and to companies. And I started doing a lot of work with the Aspen Institute. And the process went on from there. I think what was really important to me was when I was at Harvard Business School, one of the things I was really working on was looking at not just creating a course on ethics, but thinking about how can you integrate issues around ethical decision-making and ethical action into the other core courses. So how can you integrate it into finance or marketing or operations? And I think that really helped me frame my thinking, because what I was seeing is that we could certainly design a course around ethics, but it didn't necessarily have anything to do with what was discussed in any of the other courses. And so that was kind of frustrating to me. And then the other thing that was frustrating to me is what we actually did in the ethics courses. We would approach it as if it was entirely a cognitive issue. We were always talking about creating a decision-making framework, right? And it was sort of like, we would have this black box and you put in all the information one end and the right answer would come out the other end. And then you were done. And I call it the preach and pretend method. We would preach to you about what was right, and then we'd pretend you could do it. And I was pretty frustrated and disillusioned with that. And so I actually decided to stop working in this area. I thought, I've got some other skills. I'll do some other kind of consulting. Maybe it'll be around diversity, maybe it'll be around something else. But I really became kind of disillusioned with this. But through a variety of experiences, which I can explain to you if you're interested, I ended up coming up with a different approach, which was the giving voice to values approach. Could you create a kind of moral muscle memory? Could you create a kind of default to voice and action, but not just to speaking up? Because I was interviewing lots of people and gathering lots of stories. And one of the things I was learning is that the people who voiced and acted on their values effectively, it wasn't typically a matter of blowing the whistle or of shaking their fist and speaking truth to power, telling their boss that he or she was evil. It was usually something much more tactical, much more nuanced, much more strategic. And so I was thinking, could you create a default to informed voice Because the other thing I was learning from all these stories I was gathering is that the kinds of objections that people encounter when they are facing a values conflict or an ethical conflict, they're repetitious. They're fairly predictable. They're powerful, but they're not bulletproof. So they're things like, oh, it's not material. It's not a big enough deal to worry about. We'll wait till there's a real issue. Or, it's just standard operating procedure in this industry, or in this organization, or in this part of the world. Or, it may be problematic, but it's not my responsibility. It's above my pay grade. Or, yeah, there may be some questions here, but don't you feel loyal to your company or your manager or your customer or your colleagues, And so those kinds of arguments would come up again and again, dressed up slightly differently. They're powerful and they're very hard to respond to in the moment. But what I was also realizing is that people did find ways to respond to them, but you need to rehearse, you need to practice, you need to think through them in advance. And so for all of those reasons, I started thinking maybe there was a different approach. And that was the beginning of giving voice to values. I also taught an elective at UVA-Darden, which I called Leadership When It Really Counts, which is kind of an interesting course. It's got 3 components to it. The first component is Learn, where the students are introduced to the GVV methodology and practice with it. The second component is called Create, where they work in teams to create a GVV style scenario, something that in most cases they themselves experienced when they were working, and a solution. And then the third part of the course is called Teach, where they then teach their case to each other using a GVV method. And some of those cases then end up being revised and refined and added to the GVV curriculum collection. I think one of the most exciting things that I'm doing with companies right now is the work I've been doing for the last few years with KPMG, where we took that course that I described earlier with the Learn, Create, Teach, and we adapted it for use within the firm. And so we did some initial introductions to all of 33,000 domestic employees about what GVV is and got them to practice with it. But now we've run multiple cohorts of what they're calling the GVV Master Facilitators Program, where we work with managers and partners to run them through that Learn, Create, Teach, where they create KPMG specific and function specific, whether it's audit or tax or business processes scenarios, and then practice teaching them. And then they are then sent out to do that kind of teaching within their own KPMG learning establishment. So it's a way of building this greater and greater cohort of people who are both able to facilitate this kind of conversation and hopefully also then apply these things in their own management experiences. Well, I guess the last thing I would just say is that, people will often say, well, what's the one thing you want people to take away, from giving voice to values? And, I usually say, well, it's all about asking a different question. So instead of asking what's right, that's an important question. It's about asking, once you know what's right, how do you get it done? And what I like people to feel hopefully after experiencing GVV is that they may have more choices than they think they did.